Welcome to Eyes and Teeth Season 8, The Grand Order of Water Rats, Part 2. The Grand Order of Water Rats Charitable Fund represents an unselfish giving to those less fortunate than ourselves, providing a stream of support for nationally recognised charities, whilst embracing benevolence of our members, their families and our show business colleagues. It also retains the power to make special awards to worthy individuals or organisations at the discretion of our trustees. Ian Richards, King Rat, 2016 and 17. A slice of history. This is an extract from past King Rat Fred Russell's History of the Grand Order of Water Rats. A record of the first 58 years, written especially for the Water Rats in 1947. Early in the year 1889, James Finney, one of the top stars of that period, who with his lady partner Marie gave an attractive aquatic display in a large tank, was fulfilling an engagement at the Empire South Shields. Then under the control of Mr. Richard Thornton, Dick Thornton was particularly interested in racing ponies and owned an intelligent trotter called the Magpie. Finney accompanied Mr. Thornton to the racetrack at Newcastle to witness the performance of the Metropolis. On his return to London, Finney reported the matter to his bosom pals Joe Elvin and Jack Lotto, who also were much interested in the sport of kings and its offshoots. Joe suggested the pony could be brought to London and raced a 50-50 basis, one half of the winnings, if any, to go to Mr. Thornton, and the other half to a syndicate of which Joe and Jack Lotto were the principals. It was agreed, and in due course the pony was brought to London and stabled at Delaune Street, Kennington, Joe being elected manager of the syndicate. A racing buggy that had seen better days was purchased, and the gauntlet was thrown at the feet of any trotting sport that cared to pick it up. Joe described the course as a straight mile on the open Croydon Road, starting at Thornton Heath and finishing at the William IV Public House in Streatham. The procedure was for the animal to be driven from the stables at Kennington to the Streatham Public House, pulled up there, permitted a look around to take its bearings as it were, and then the nose bag was put on. Directly, the pony had secured its first mouthful of corn. However, the nose bag was whisked off, and the Magpie, with his appetite just whetted and longing for more, was driven a mile down the road to Thornton Heath. Here he was turned about and raced back to the pub, where the nose bag was immediately clapped on again and the pony allowed to feed to its heart's content. It did not take this bright animal long to appreciate the sequence of events. The news that sport was to be had so near home on Sunday morning spread amongst the pros, residing in the neighbourhood of Brixton, who assembled in full force to urge the pony on to victory, and huge bets were placed at the many taverns which lined the route. In the meantime, the pony's name was changed from the Magpie to the Water Rat. Joe Elvin was driving the pony home one morning in the rain, and its thick coat soaked. The animal presented a somewhat sodden, woe-begone appearance. In Brixton Road, a bus driver hailed the comedian. "Hello, Joe, what have you got there?" "A trotter," replied Joe. "Trotter?" said the bus driver. "Blimey, it looks more like a bleeding water rat." And Joe was struck by the thought. What a novel name for the pony. There was a pull-up at the nearest hostelry, supporters gathered around, and the Water Rat was duly christened. Next day a horse clipper was entrusted with the task of cutting the letters R.A.T. in the thick black coat on the pony's flanks, and the animal quickly became a character of the neighbourhood. After one success by the Water Rat, Joe Elvin suggested an upriver outing of supporters to celebrate their good fortune. Accordingly, on a Sunday morning in the summer of 1889, a party of around 12 left the Canterbury Public House in Westminster Bridge Road by coach and four and drove to Sunbury-on-Thames, where the merrymakers, after a pleasant afternoon's boating on the river, wound up with a sumptuous dinner at the Magpie Hotel, Sunbury. It was at that dinner that Joe Elvin, intrigued by the spirit of camaraderie prevailing, suggested the consolidation of friendship by the formation of a coterie of pals of the Water Rat, and the suggestion was enthusiastically claimed by all. And so it was at that historic gathering at the Magpie Hotel, Sunbury, in the summer of 1889, that this order was first brought into being. During the ensuing months of that year, more or less informal meetings of the little community continued to take place. At those meetings, rules were formulated and methods of procedure discussed. This work was not completed until April 1890. When the rules were finally approved and the fraternity, the Select Order of Water Rats, subsequently to become the Grand Order of Water Rats, was launched into the public domain as a showbiz charitable organisation. The motto adopted was philanthropy, conviviality and social intercourse, and it was agreed that the bulk of the fortune accrued from the pony success would become the basis of our charity's fund, initially dedicated to helping fellow artists who were injured, sick, or had fallen on hard times, a practice which continues to this day. Eventually, the Sunday morning races was closed down by the police, who objected to the conversion of the public highway into a racetrack, so the pony was sent back to Mr. Thornton at Newcastle, where in the fullness of time and at a ripe old age he was gathered to his fathers. The order forged ahead rapidly. For the first few months there were 12 members only. Then the membership was extended to 20, and in January 1891 there was another extension to 40. Subsequently, the membership was raised to 50, then to 100, and finally the existing limit at the time was removed altogether. In 2021, there's never more than 200 members in the Grand Order. So that's the history of our Grand Order, and for me, Steve Hewlett, a young ventriloquist from Basingstoke, to be invited has to be because of my love for variety, our business, and the people within it. I start season 8 with one man I have been in awe of for decades. If there was a TV summer show, Good Old Days show, a Will Tappers and Shunters, This Is Your Life, TV specials, Crackerjack, Royal Command Performance, then Bernie Clifton was there. On those TV shows, the presenters would dread guests such as Freddie Starr, Rod Hull and Emu, Michael Barrymore, Mr. Blobby, and Bernie Clifton was on that list only for the fact of their unpredictability. If you talk to anyone who has worked with or spent an evening with Bernie, then there would only be hilarious anecdotes to follow. Today you can hear them from the man himself, talking about Les Dawson, the late Duke of Edinburgh, Bobby Ball, Las Vegas, Burt Bacharach, Frankie Vaughan, Stan Boardman, the QE2 and the Marx Brothers. Welcome to Eyes and Teeth, the king of props, Bernie Clifton.
Samaritans, your call is very important to us, and it better be serious because we're very busy. It could have been anybody, couldn't it?
It could have been.
I always take a risk when I pick the phone up and launch into some kind of rhetoric or crap on the premise. Hello, this is the Roybank Scotland here, when they've had about 30 seconds of verbiage. Assuming it's you, Steve, how are you?
Thanks for calling PPI. How can I help?
Thank you. Yes, sir. I love that when they say your call is important to us, but would you please wait another 20 minutes, please? See how important it is to you.
You're important to me, Bernie. You keep people's spirits up, which is very important at a time like this. And the last couple of days have been awful for obvious reasons. And that tribute you put on last night with Bobby Ball was beautiful. Really nice.
I'm happy that you shared it. As you said, I mean, these are terrible times, and that's just a proper hammer blow. And I know we all, everybody, the hearts are going out to Yvonne and family, and of course Tommy and his family. And really, it was a conversation I was having on the morning that we got the news with a good friend of mine, Neil Makin, who does quite a lot of techie stuff for me.
Okay.
Saying, this Sunday Facebook video show that I do live, I just don't know what we're going to do, because it's just going to slosh around doing stuff, and the whole programme would have been overshadowed by the tragedy of Bobby Ball dying.
Out of respect, you kind of want to do something, it was a lovely and the right thing to do at that time, so...
Yeah, I mean, Neil has spent the last 3 nights without sleep. He's been up burning the midnight oil since Thursday and trying to glue clips and stuff together. And it was... I'm pleased we were able to haul it over the line because neither of us have got any experience about doing that kind of thing. But thanks to Zoom and some good old mates coming on board, we tried to do the lad some kind of justice,
Oh, it was a lovely tribute. So nice, and I didn't know the producer was. It was nice to get to meet the producer of the show, and the last laugh in Vegas. It was brilliant to actually finally.
I mean, there was a lot that we would love to have done more, because they put us through a few hoops. This band of 70-year-olds in the hot, steaming desert, but it was an experience. The Vegas series that we all felt privileged to have been part of. Steve, it was absolutely wonderful, and we've had to deal with the tragedy of losing Kenny Lynch, and now Bobby.
Yeah.
But there's still a kind of a warm glow between the team, if you can call us a team.
Those memories you created out there, I mean, it was just brilliant television, Bernie, and we were so delighted to see the group of legends that did go out there, and to see you all come together was brilliant, even if you didn't get the bedroom that you wanted.
Especially against the back cloth, Steve, it could have been an absolute car crash.
Yeah.
According to our Vegas producer, who admitted it later, who admitted he was wrong, Frank Marino, he looked at us and thought, "What have I done here?"
Really?
I think he was on. He could have easily bowed down and said, "This is not for me," because his name was all over it, And fortunately, there was a number of good turns, and we sort of we proved him wrong, and it was a great success all round. If the phone rings, my agent. Do you remember agents?
I don't know, but it'll be another cancellation, wouldn't it?
Wonderful story about me trying to rebook my one-man show to a theatre back in Louth. And I took my one-man show there a couple of years ago, and I rang him recently. I said, "What about putting it back in next spring?" And he went, "Yeah, I'm sure that's possible." I said, "But how will we go on regarding the audience and the social distancing?" And he paused and then said, "Well, it was all right last time." So,
we'll get used to it. Yeah, we've always
know.
been used to it. I've had similar things on my tours.
You know that 5 minutes we've just had?
Yes.
That was my best bit. Frankly, I think I've peaked. People like you and I in the business, we've got this survival technique, I suppose, which hopefully will get us there. It
clicks in, and I've had that switched on since March, really, and I've noticed you've done the same as well, which is really nice to see your spirits as high as they can be. Thank God for Bernie Clifton.
Yeah, you say that, but for 50 years, it's been a total opposite viewpoint from many audiences all over the globe. Is he still at it? Is he still getting away with it? Those are the comments.
Isn't it on your website? It says, and I bet you thought I was dead. Is that the first line to your website?
One of those was. One of those lines is an absolutely cast iron belter. And the interesting thing, going back to the Last Laugh in Vegas series, is that getting us all together in a car, all in various stages of exhaustion, I suppose.
Yes.
That was one of the most wonderful things about it. We were all, I think, Jess Conrad was the oldest, and I'm next to Jess. I think Jess has got about a year on me, and I'm 84. We were tottering about, but got there in the end, Steve.
They've repeated it a couple of times, Bernie, because of the success of the show. So it got some great viewings, didn't it?
It did, and I think people, because you're talking about a couple of generations, aren't you, that have grown up with us.
Yes.
Back to when we started doing television, Anita, I think, was doing television in the 60s. I mean, how is that possible? She looks fantastic.
Wow, she's adorable, isn't she?
And then Sue, the Hurricane Pollard, used to breeze through the back door of the villa like 100 miles an hour and 1,000 decibels. And me and Bobby, we discovered that there had to be an on-off switch between her shoulder blades. So once she got into full flow, we'd look at each other to go around the back and say click, and she'd just freeze because she's unstoppable. that lady.
She is, isn't she? Bless her.
Love her to death. Yeah.
Oh, you could see the friendship between you all. It was so nice to see that camaraderie, between the whole group.
I think because, Steve, we know that subconsciously we're all aware of the journey that we're on and the journey that we've had over this 4 or 5 decades, it may be even longer, and aware of the pitfalls and the bad times that you've got to have experienced over that period, haven't you?
Yes.
And I think
yes.
in that time, so there was probably, Steve, a mutual respect, sometimes grudging, when the abuse kicked in. But nevertheless, I think that was the common denominator that we all had between us, that we've been round the block several times, been there and done it, and here we are all lumped together.
Over those years, you've all accumulated these reviews about your own work, and I've got one here from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival from The Guardian. Clifton is a suitable genius. This warm, uncynical lunatic in the funny suit is the spiritual father of Vic Reeves, Harry Hill and Johnny Vegas. He's not just a nutter with a flightless bird fixation. Au contraire, Clifton is a god. Now, reviews like this in The Guardian and even the Edinburgh Festival are quite rare, especially for a mainstream comedy variety performer. But you show no signs of stopping at all in your recent ventures with The Last Laugh in Las Vegas, and your surprising appearance on The Voice as well, which just means that your PR is just a great addition to your success. And during the lockdown as well, you hosted your own online Facebook shows as well, just bringing on people and interviewing and doing variety and keep entertaining. So the spirit of Bernie Clifton just keeps going on, entertaining it. And there have been really dark times, but people adore you so much, Bernie, because you bring so much happiness to them. But what keeps you going? What makes you happy, and what keeps you going in this wonderful job?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's, and thank you for trawling through those bits, because they do mean a lot, and it is a kind of a measure, I suppose, of certainly of the work ethic, which I probably always had, and I'm constantly reminded of work ethic and drive as I get older, and energies are more easily sapped. I was only thinking the other day, and when something came up about the Barbicoon the Theatre,
oh yes,
which I did a summer season in 1969 with Anthony Bygraves, who was putting the summer shows on, and
wow.
I followed in, and it was his training ground, Barbicoon at Roy Hood, and I got this thing about onwards, work. Even so, the reason I've raised the subject, work ethic, because on Saturday nights, after we'd finished our evening show, I'd throw all the props in the car and barrel off down to a nightclub in Paynton and do a midnight cabaret, when really I should have been back in the digs with my feet up.
And resting, so, yeah.
And because I think, Steve, there was so much work around, we'd go out, we'd follow it. And there was an old adage that I heard many times and used it myself: get it while it's there.
Yes.
Because if you don't, somebody else will. And we'd turn up, and, you do a working men's club, and close the first half, and get out of there at 10 o'clock and down the A1 to outskirts of Leeds and do a midnight or a 1 a.m. Or there was so much work, and I can't remember ever turning anything down. It was there to be had and there to be done. And I think as you do that and continue, your horizons broaden. You get more chances. You're seen more often by different people, and eventually, you will get chances. And that's I think that's a truism for all of us.
Eyes and Teeth. On your website, it says you're one of the most original comedians around. So being original is one of those factors, really, where the success continues. And it says your engaging style and zany visual humour have made you a star of pantomime, summer seasons, concerts, cabaret, radio and television. So you're as popular now as you were 40 years ago. So that's the longevity, really. You just put yourself out there and you just kept working. and don't turn anything down. That's the secret, really, isn't it?
As a teenager, it became my only outlet. I'd gone from job to job. I was pulled out of grammar school at the age of 15 without taking my GCEs, whatever they were then, because I was going to fail them all. And I got a job at the Co-op as a Holvis boy with a bike with a big basket on front. And then I failed at that because the bike kept falling over. And then TV, aerial erector, and I didn't like heights, and then a plumber. And I realised, and in a way, the plumbing, working on the building sites, Steve, as a teenager, I think it kind of defined me, because there I was in St Helens with there were a lot of Irish labourers there. There was a lot of Scousers on the site, and there was a not particularly Scousers, but I think that part of the country, you would always claim this for yourself anyway, but the St Helens humour, we sort of got into that anything for the crack, practical jokes, japes, that humour, that raw humour, quite sadistic sometimes. And I always think as well, when it comes to practical jokes, and this is me a culpa if you like, that there's usually a victim. And nevertheless, it became part of me, the stuff. And then all of a sudden, I realised working in bathrooms, Steve, that I had a singing voice.
Right. Good acoustics, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course I thought to myself, well, actually, this isn't bad. And I got a job with I went to the local dance hall and got a job singing with a band, which was quite an achievement, to stand up on Saturday night in front of your peers, in a crowded dance hall with fellow teenagers.
Wow. And
to sing all the ballads from the hit parade, the songs that we had then. So that was I was becoming firmly entrenched as a voice singer, but it became obvious that the singing was never going to be enough when after a few months of this, I was actually banned from the dance hall by the manager during the last waltz, when I wasn't on stage, borrowing the doorman's bike and riding it round the dance hall with the bell ringing.
Straight in there with the props. I like that.
And my mate Gordon Spencer, he did the same. And we took our shirts off, put them round in the gents, put them round our necks like a cape, tied the sleeve around our necks. Borrowed the bike, and we'd just come out the pub, and we'd seen in the pub, wow, all these crimes are coming out. The curtains in one of these rooms, there were these long bamboo curtain rods. So we took the curtains down and put the bamboo rods down our trousers and got into the dance hall walking with a straight-legged limp. And this is the boy singer. This is the heartthrob. And so we got a bike. We borrowed the bikes, and it was a really big dance hall, as they were in those days. And we had this duel. We were jousting. He was coming down one way, down the middle, and of course everybody, all the lads forgot about pulling birds. Everybody they just formed two ranks and went, yes.
Really?
It was absolute lunacy.
That's chaos.
I remember being hauled back into the gents and being sacked by the manager. And his name was Sylvester Burrows, and I remember him saying, "Look at you're a bloody idiot." And my friend Gordon, who by that time had put his shirt back on, said, "Oh, easy on, it's not that bad." And not that bad. He's in a dance hall. He's got no bloody shirt. So Steve, we were a breed, and I think we had, at that time, we had a lot going for us. We were in the right part of the world. We were just down the East Lancs Road from Knotty Ash. We'd all got our heroes, comedy heroes. I got my singing heroes as well. People like Eddie Fisher.
Yeah.
And I was a big fan of, and then off. But I realised then I had to leave St Helens because I was a bad plumber. I was the world's worst plumber, and knew that once I'd been called up to do my service, I realised, Steve, that if I'd gone back to plumbing, I would have been trapped in St Helens as the world's worst plumber and a weekend club singer. So I just left home. I left home and went to Doncaster, met a girl out there and started doing the Yorkshire clubs. And I remember my mum, bless her, was so upset. What are you going to do? I gave all my tools to my brother, who was also a plumber, on the premise that if I gave my tools away, I could never go back.
Okay, and you stuck with that.
Yeah, and well, I just knew, Steve, that I had to break away. And she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, how are you going to get to Doncaster?" I said, "Well, I'm going to get a bus up to the East Lancs Road and put a lift down to Manchester, get a tram across Manchester, and then put a lift from Manchester to Sheffield, and get a tram across Sheffield, and get a bus, and so on." And she looked at me as I was heading for the bus stop with those immortal words, said, "Bernard, you're going to the devil."
Really?
Yeah.
So she didn't have any faith in the show business world.
She was around long enough to see me having some success, and used to come with me on summer seasons. So that was.
Oh, that's lovely. She got to see that. So your bug really, did it start? With the bamboos down the trousers. Did it start on that dance hall, or was it in the clubs where you started to do the singing?
And I've used the word like as the man from Edinburgh said, in the Guardian, it was
yes.
like some kind of, it was inspired lunacy. We would take any situation and we'd manufacture some mayhem out of it, even though, as I said, I'd got this singing voice. It took another 10 years before I was establishing myself in the clubs.
Okay.
And it was then, Steve, that I met Les Dawson.
He gave you advice, didn't he?
Well, he did, yeah. It was I was doing some comedy and some jokes and singing, and Barney Collivan saw me at Battle Variety Club and booked me for the good old days, and that was in 1971. I did well, if I say it myself, on the show.
Yeah.
But afterwards,
wow.
Les took me to one side, Les Dawson, and said, "Well, he said you're okay, but you're only doing what another 100 comedians are doing. Why don't you try and find your own style? What do you enjoy?" And I said, "Well, I just love visual comedy and props." And he said, "Well, why don't you go out and become a prop comic?" And because of Les's stature, everybody adored him, and I was thrilled to be in conversation with him. I took him at his word, and from that moment, it had to be visual, whatever. It had to be a prop, and I went berserk. And over the years, subsequently, he'd always say to me, "I put you right there, didn't I?" And I'd say, "Well, Les, you did," because I was sort of ploughing my own furrow, Steve.
Yeah, that's lovely that he got to see you actually follow that through with the props. And when did the ostrich come into it, Bernie? Was that later, or did you use lots of different props before you got to the ostrich?
It was a few years later. I mean, I got the day after Les gave me that advice. I passed an Oxfam shop and bought a big lion skin, a full-size hearth-rugged lion skin for 50 pence, and off it went. I was in summer season in Jersey, and I saw an advert that Shepperton Film Studios were closing down, and I flew from Jersey for the day and came back on the plane that night with a huge 12-foot rubber shark. And I was in a club, and I was asked to draw a raffle. The tickets were in 2 biscuit tins, and I jumped in the biscuit tins and did a fandango. So, and then I was at a Halloween display and saw a black cat, and I got the black cat, put that on my shoulder.
I've seen a clip of the cat. Was that on good old days? I think you used the cat, didn't you?
Oh, no, yeah.
No.
But there've been several generations of. But I was on a crusade, really, to be visual, and I did have a eureka. Well, I had probably several eureka moments, but one of them in particular, I remember. I just sat up in bed, thinking to myself, if only I could do a Marx Brothers, going like, again, my heroes. And I suddenly thought, if I had a big coat or a big Macintosh like Harpo did, with pockets full of stuff, and I suddenly thought of the lyrics to the desert song, Lonely as a Desert Breeze, and I thought that the red shadow. John Hanson, he wears a big red cloak. So if I get a big red cloak, and then the lyrics of the song, Lonely as a Desert Breeze...
Is this where the fire extinguisher comes into it?
Something can be put under the cloak.
Yeah.
And I was in a club in South Wales, backstage waiting to go on, and I said to this guy, "What's that big cylinder?" He said, "Oh, that's our CO2. I went, "How's it work?" He went, "It's like this." And he turned the nozzle on. I thought, "That's it. I've got lonely as a desert breeze." So I had a robe made, a big red robe made. I got one of these. They used to give me. I got to a club and said, "Have you got any CO2?" "Yeah, you can take what you want, mate. Yeah, it's all free." And I'd go away and I sort of assembled this collection of CO2 cylinders, found a place to get them charged, and I'd got something going. And then the cat, I put the cat on the shoulder. So, I've got a cat on my shoulder, I've got a robe on, I've got gas hidden under the...
You can't get any more visual than what you've just explained. I mean, I think that's on the good old days, that clip with the cat on the shoulder and the CO2 can underneath. But when it goes off, you give quite a shock to the audience, don't you? It's so loud.
And Sigmund Romberg, who wrote the Desert Song for me, he didn't realise at the time, he actually did me a favour. When you think "Lonely as a Desert Breeze," and then the parody comes in, "Get that breeze between your knees." It's a lovely feeling you've never felt before. It's a thrill beyond compare. Goes up your nose and so on. Thinking to myself, this was sent from heaven. I was
meant to do it. It's comedy gold, isn't it?
And just by seeking out and then colliding with these opportunities, I was on a roll.
It seemed to fall into place, especially when originality came into it. And when did you bump into Peter Pullen? Because I think I spoke to Peter recently. He sends his love, and I think he made the first ostrich for you. Is that right?
Oh, Peter Pullen, the genius that is Peter Pullen.
I know, we adore him.
We were having stuff made. I mean, amongst there are many enormous props, and I'd have to get to a club at lunchtime to do an evening show to set the props up and everything. And all of a sudden, the ostrich idea came along, and someone had seen it, and I thought, whoa. And I gave the idea to Peter, and he went, "Oh, I know what that is. Yeah, I recognise that." And he rang me. He had a workshop in Coventry on the inner ring road. Yes. And said, "I've done this this chicken for you." I went, "Oh, come down and try it on." So I drove down to Coventry to find out how it works. So I went out of his workshop into the rush hour traffic and completely stopped the Coventry city centre, the whole round to a halt, because there I was, this lunatic, dashing about on the back of a big duck. People were getting out of the car saying, "What?" And I suddenly thought, well, this is interesting. Yeah, but it was another prop. I already had a fish, I had my biscuit tins, I had my cat on my shoulder, and that's really, and you're going to identify with this, Steve. That was really how it started, because it's all right having the basics, but then it's what you then put into
you do with
the
it.
Refinement and the improvements and the...
Make it your own, yeah.
Yeah, and those trips up and down to Coventry, from where I live in Derbyshire, it's not 5 minutes, but I was going up and down there 2 or 3 times a week, and on my way to gigs, and just going down there to catch up with Peter. And Peter, I'll use the word again, genius that he is, developed this into being so lifelike that it's that wonderful thing about the eye deceiving the brain, isn't it?
Yes.
And I was away, but it was only another prop, Steve, in a menagerie, I suppose, of other props. But it kind of appealed to me. But it
took off.
Just the seed.
Yeah, I've had about 15 props made from Peter Pullen, so I just keep going back to him, because he puts his heart into what you want, doesn't he? And he really does care about what he's building. And so it really is nice to see the finished project and for that to stick out all these years later. And you took that on The Voice as well. So when you came on The Voice, Bernie, I think the industry, because you kept it secret from your family and your agent and the industry, but when you came on, and forgive me for not knowing this, I did not know you had such an incredible voice. Your vocal was just stunning. And it was so nice to see you on there. Unexpected, but lovely to see you on that show.
It was a risk, and you're right, I didn't tell anybody, because had I told everybody, I'm sure they would have tried to talk me out of it.
Yeah.
And I just got this thing about, I know I've got this singing voice, but how can I... So I just wrote away for an audition as a member of the public under my real name, Bernard Quinn, and you're filling the documentation you have to complete, retired plumber, age 78, 79, whatever.
So you didn't lie? No, it wasn't a lie.
And I went in and did my audition, and they said, "Oh, go and wait. We'll let you know." They called me back, and they called me up for another audition, and it was only then, because the people I was auditioning to, they got no idea who I was.
They're very young producers, aren't they, these days?
Yeah, they were young producers, and I was just this old guy. But in the end, when I felt it was time to divulge my alter ego,
yes,
it suddenly became very interesting, because here I was, as you've just said, it was a shock to the system. This ostrich jockey who suddenly had got off the back of the duck and was singing for his supper. And by the time I told my family and my agent, it was too late for them to do anything about it. I was in. I was booked to do the
brilliant,
the live audition. And
you created a moment that was beautiful. It was we had a fellow water rat, brother water rat, on there with Peter Donegan, and he created a lovely moment with Tom Jones. And the other moment is you on there. It was just so nice that they stand out, with greatest moments on The Voice. It was just brilliant. And they were so, when they realised who you were after the spot, and you started chasing rounds, with the ostrich, that was so nice as well. They realised who you were, and
it was quite a day. On my way to the studio, I couldn't find the studios in Salford, and I parked my car on a pavement and went across the road to a hairdresser's and said, "Could you give me any idea where this BBC studios?" And I looked back through the window, and there was a traffic warden hovering over my car. So I went, "Oh, hang on." So I ran across the road and pulled my hamstring.
Oh.
Yeah, so I got halfway through the road, and I came back, leaned on the car, and "Please don't give me a ticket, because I'm lost." Because I said I wasn't giving me a ticket. He said, "I was just looking at your tax disc." So now I've got this limp on up there, and I got my way to the studio in a lot of pain. They actually got the medics to put some ice on the back of my thigh, and you would never have guessed it, because the only thing I had to do physically that day was to walk from the back to the microphone on the front of the stage. But afterwards, they insisted that I got on the back of the chicken, which they insisted I took with me, and I was in so much agony with my leg. I just wanted it to be over. But Ricky couldn't believe it. He said, "You actually did it," because as a child, his dad was a TV producer at the BBC, and they were filming a show at the Blackpool Tower Circus. Ricky was 4, I think, or 5, and I came out of the ostrich and frightened him to death. And
so he never forgot you.
There was a photograph that his dad sent me of poor little Ricky going, and that kind of defined his childhood as well. So it's all kind of linked, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, well, we are all linked. I'm about to drop a little bit of a name here, but I think it's the first time we met, Bernie. We were outside Buckingham Palace, and we meet 3 months after I had become a water rat. When we met at the gates of the palace before we entered to the water rat celebration, it was 125 years of the order before we met the Queen. But you had a photograph of you meeting the Queen, and was that on a Royal Variety performance?
Yeah.
And did you show her the picture of when you met her before?
No, I'll tell you what I did, and it caused me no end of family grief, this idea that I had. I suddenly thought, well, the Duke of Edinburgh, he's a companion water rat. He has a sense of humour. So we're all queuing up, first of all, to meet the Duke. And I've got my daughter with me, sitting next to me, and he's coming down the line. And in the waistband of my trousers, I've got this 10 by 8 black and white photograph of me shaking hands with the Queen.
Yes.
And as he approached me, and I always remember Fran Simmons meeting him, and she bumped into him and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't know you were here. I live here. I live here." And then there was the other water rat whose name I can't quite remember, but was what do you do? He said, "We're musicians, sir. Where do you work?" "Well, we work mainly on the continent, sir." "Don't they like you here?" It was wonderful. I'm sure he was trying to live up to this, this
reputation
persona,
of yes,
this irascible 90 noctogenarian. But then, as he's coming down the line to me, next to me, ready to shake hands, I think he shook hands with Kenny Earl, and then it was my turn. I whipped out this photograph, showed it to him, and I said, "Could you get the missus to sign this?" He went, scooting off, went right down the line. And my daughter, who was standing next to me with a hand out to shake hands with him, got totally blanked. So, that was...
backfired.
I thought that was ill thought. Fortunately, we got to meet the Queen later in the evening.
Yeah,
so.
Did she sign it?
Yeah, but it didn't go down well. No, probably not to sign it. Yeah, when Keith Simmons introduced me, he said, "Your Majesty, this is Bernie Clifton, who has entertained you during the Royal Variety performance on the back of an ostrich." And she just looked up at me and said, "She's not very tall, is she, Steve?"
No, bless her.
She just looked up at me and said, "Ostrich? Ostrich?" And I went, "Yes, Your Majesty." I said, "The ostrich still performing these days, but is much, much slower." And she went, Isn't it funny how things do get slower?" And off she went. So that was my good. Yeah, I remember meeting you there. We were all outside without queuing up to get.
Yeah, I was with my wife Nina and your daughter. It was lovely to meet you for the first time, and what a place to meet as well. I remember meeting Prince Philip on that night. He said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a ventriloquist." And I said, I once worked with your grandson, Prince William, at Thursford. I'd done a Christmas show at Thursford. And he said, "Where?" And I said, "It was at Thursford." He said, "Where?" I don't know if he couldn't hear me or he didn't know what I was saying. So I said, "It's near Sandringham." And he says, "Yes, I know where Sandringham is." And then he walked off. And so it was... He never really finished conversations, did he?
I know, yeah. Well, I mean, who would have his job? When you think you're meeting 100 strangers a day...
I know, yeah.
On average, how can you possibly be interested? It's a human impossibility that you can't find everyone interesting, can you?
I was going to say, to show interest in every story, and surely if he's not interested, he just walks off like he did with us. But it's interesting, isn't it? And I remember the conversation I had with the Queen about Archie Andrews. It's fascinating. You never forget those, even as small as they were. They're little treasures, aren't they, those moments in this business that we get.
Was Archie Andrews, was he an inspiration to you?
No, I got to work with Archie Andrews 40 years after Peterborough retired him. So I co-wrote this play called Re-Educating Archie.
I was going to say.
Yeah, and I got Dave Evans to play Max Bygraves, and I had a friend called Helen Ward Jackson who played Hattie Jakes. And I put a show on, actually, which was paying tribute to Peterborough. But I actually used the original Archie in the show, and it was fascinating. So I spoke to the Queen about Peterborough actually working Windsor Castle when she was a child. And she remembered all the people like Tony Hancock, and she was delighted to hear about it. And then you have to move, you only get a minute and then they move on. But yeah, it was nice to bring that up because I knew the history between that dummy. That's the connection between me and the royal family, really, is through that dummy, which is an incredible history.
Yeah, and what about following that? I mean, who I've already mentioned Ken Dodd and the Marx Brothers. Who was you obviously felt that you had a gift at ventriloquism.
I started when I saw Jimmy Tamley on New Faces in '87. So Jimmy Tamley was my inspiration, and then
Wow.
Keith Harris and Ron Lucas, an American ventriloquist.
Oh, I know, Ron Lucas. Wow.
Yeah, and Ron was incredible to me. Keith Harris was incredible to me, and Jimmy Tamley was. So I actually had 3 ventriloquists that really looked out for me when I started, and so I was inspired from the age of 12 onwards. And this is all I've ever done, really. When it's in your blood, it's a passion, isn't it, Bernie? And this business gets to you.
That's what I want to know. In your blood, how come it was in your blood?
It was in my sawdust, where Archie's concerned.
Yeah, but why? Did you suddenly think, I've got a gift for this? Or were your parents in the business? Or
No, I was the only one in the business. But once I saw a ventriloquist on TV, I saw Jimmy win the grand final. I thought, well, this is an amazing thing. This guy with the puppet. I loved ventriloquism at that point. I didn't know what it was. But I started to practice in the mirror days later, and Jimmy lived round the corner from me, so I knocked on his door and I said, would you teach me? Then I ended up being his roadie for 10 years. And and so he taught me everything you need to know about being on the road. And then I started doing talent competitions at school, and I started to win them. And I thought, I may have something here. So I turned professional when I was 22.
How about that? How about fate playing you a great card? You say Jimmy lived just around the corner.
He lived around the corner from me. The reason we sat down and watched him as a family was because he was local. And because of that aspect, I guess that's why we watched. Otherwise, we may not have had any reason to sit down and support a local celebrity.
Yeah.
My best mate at school, Diddy, he actually lived opposite Jimmy. So he said, do you want to meet him? So the next day after school, actually it was before school, he reminded me of that recently, I knocked on his door and asked for an autograph, and it all went from there. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible how it all happened. It was just a few weeks after that, Bernie, my sister came home from school with a ventriloquist dummy, and I bought it off her for £5. And Ray Allen's book came out at the same time, called Got La Gear. So all that happened at the same time, and here I am.
But you know what you've just described? You've just described like an interplanetary situation where all the stars have lined up.
It's cosmic, isn't it?
If you just were to separate all those items and put them in a list, the very fact that you only sat down and watched him because he was local, the very fact that your mate lived opposite, and then your sister coming home with a dummy, how sort of wonderful is that it all fell into place? Yeah,
and Ray Allen's book as well, all at the same time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
That November in 1987, I'll never forget it, but I started to watch variety shows. I was hooked to variety, and that's when I started to see you on television, working with all those greats, and the Tarbuck, Jimmy Tarbuck, and the variety in the 80s, Bernie, was fantastic, wasn't it, on telly?
There was so much work. I'm just looking through my Facebook page, and there's several pages. I know you're aware of them. Keep Variety Alive, and one of them was Cannon and Ball on the North Pier in Blackpool.
Wow!
And the opening night was like May the 10th until October the 40th or something. You think to yourself,
really?
That's a lifetime, and it was 2 shows.
2 shows a day, sold out. Yeah.
And Bobby, Tommy, you used to tell us that was when they first really broke through, and they're walking up the pier, to the theatre, and it's a big long pier, and there are people that they're overtaking the queue, and there are people queuing. They're almost like the length of the pier. And we thought, I wonder what they're queuing for. They're actually queuing to see Cannon and Ball. So
those were the days. I missed out on all that. Sad.
But that massive work, those opportunities that reverting back to the conversation that we had earlier about seizing, having the work ethic.
Yes.
And I suppose in a way, investing in your craft the way you must have done with Peter Pullen, to get another prop, a better prop, another character.
Definitely, yeah.
Working on character, so I think it's not. okay. Well, let's say we'll give fate some points for being there, but it's not a coincidence. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, contributional.
I've enjoyed summer seasons. I started to do some of the theatres, and I worked in Babacombe in 2001 with my wife and Matt Slack. Ren Leah experience, and they went on and on about you because they do panto with you. So Steve and Lisa Bruce, who we adore, me and my wife, and so you had so many. But he told me so many moments that you had pranking him and everybody in the cast.
It's all going to come back to get me. Those pranks.
You are a prankster. I mean, on a recent episode on this podcast, Bernie, I spoke to Ross Lee, who actually had a TV prank show, and he was on Balls of Steel. Your pranks that I've heard about wouldn't go amiss on its own TV show, and it's so sad that you've not had that, because you've got some great ideas.
I think as well, as I said, I've said this all the time, that these japes, these practical jokes, there is a victim there somewhere, and I myself, I've been the victim of many jokes, but in some ways, the lunacy, that nonsense, the sort of pranks, I always thought, Steve, was a way of justifying the lifestyle. When you think you're away from home, you were travelling thousands of miles a week, and you were just doing stuff because it just made it all worthwhile. But, I mean, we're very lucky. It's a great job, and thank God that I was able to get away from being a bad plumber. But I was reminded only this weekend by Mick Miller about a thing that we did in Las Vegas. We were all leaving the villa at the end of our fortnight, and there was about 7 or 8 of us. We all had 2 suitcases, and the crew. There were about 20, 30 suitcases by the front door waiting for the transport to take us to the airport. And Bobby Ball had been into the town that morning because he realised he needed another suitcase, and he brought it back and he packed it, and there it was amongst all the others, all basically the same colour. And he said to me, do you know, this is going to be a nightmare, he said, because I don't know how I'm going to recognise that suitcase at the airport. and I thought about it, and I went into the crew room, and I said, you haven't got any sticky tape? And they gave me this reel. I'm looking at it now, actually, on my table, Steve. A big reel of orange, very bright orange
okay,
tape.
So it stands out when it comes round the carousel.
And I've got about a foot of this, and I tore it off, and I attached it to the handle of Bobby's suitcase. And he went, oh, thanks ever so much for that. I'm going to recognise that at Heathrow. And then his back was turned. I thought, why not? So I went round and I taped the entire selection of suitcases. There must have been 20, 30 suitcases, all with orange tape.
The whole of the cast and the crew.
All of the cast and the crew, every bit of luggage from the crew, from the company, and we're at Heathrow after an overnight flight, all a bit knackered.
Oh, I'd love to have been there when you all landed and you were at the carousel. And
then every start to come out, and every case had got some orange tape on it. And I really thought, and this is the 3rd time I've told this story the last few days, I really thought Bobby Ball was going to chin me. he said, was this you? I said, no. I said, well, I think I know who it was.
Oh, it's
Mick Miller.
Genius.
Mick Miller's suitcase, he's still got it, and it's still got the tape on the handle.
But that makes him smile, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's forever. So.
Oh, that's brilliant.
In spite of what's going on in the world, we're still fortunate, Steve, to be in this fantastic business for all its the travails that we suffer and put up with.
I know, it's about memories, isn't it? I mean, keeping memories, and we've got some great people that we work with, and those memories is what makes our business one of the greatest to be in. And I need to talk to you about this quickly. Bernie Clifton's dressing room, inside number 9 with Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith. Have you seen the show?
Yes, I've seen it. It was wonderful, wasn't it? And I met.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I met the guys. Yeah, it was nice to be referenced.
It was, I mean, your name's in the title of the show, and I was told about this a few months ago, and me and my wife watched it. It's such a beautiful piece, isn't it? And I was waiting to see you, but you're not in it.
Well, I was hoping, when I heard about it, I thought, I'm going to get a call, I'm going to be on it, because
Yeah.
I'm such these guys, I mean, the depth, the breadth of talent and application. But of course, they just referenced me in the story. But I mean, I went to see them at the Opera House in Buxton, at League of Gentlemen, a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
And we parked outside on the street, and we walked down the street behind the theatre. And I suddenly thought, we've come on the wrong night, because there's a rock concert on, and there were 2 or 3 huge articulated lorries and briefcase and packing cases, and it was like a huge production. And I thought, well, this obviously can't be for League of Gentlemen, but of course it was. What they did, they were touring arenas with the show.
Oh, it was huge, wasn't it?
But in the itinerary, they'd got Buxton Opera House, which is if you've never worked it, I hope you will, because it's a dream, a matching theatre. And I went saw that. I went backstage afterwards just to applaud what I'd seen, because the production values, it was a full-on, multi-layered production, and the scope and the pace and the quick changes and everything else about it.
Yeah, so it was like
I was so impressed.
Yeah, it was like the actual TV show, but on stage, was it? They really went all out to put a big show on.
And I don't know whether they'd ever do it again, but I mean, I just know that the areas that those 3 characters covered, they can do almost anything. And when you look at Pemberton, Steve Pemberton, isn't it? What he's done, I mean, they write, they act, they can do anything. I think they're a tremendously talented team, and it's certainly not, their success hasn't happened by accident. They must have.
They've worked hard, haven't they?
Invested in their business, haven't they?
Yeah. Have you seen the clip of Reece Shearsmith when he's filming? There's some outtakes of Car Share with Peter Kay.
Yes.
Have you seen the one of him in the back of the car, and it has you in tears? Isn't it brilliant? Yeah. Here comes the hot stepper, burn the rope. That one is so funny.
Yeah, and it came out and said it's all right for him if he makes a mistake, but if he breaks down. I love that series, and of course, Peter had his heroes in it as well. Mick Miller was a character in one of
yes,
episodes.
Of course. And you got to work with Peter Kay on Amarillo and you're in the scene with Keith Harris in the video.
I know.
What was that day like?
Oh, amazing! Come to Granada, we're doing something. All right, so I turned up, bring the ostrich, and when it was our turn, I mean, the world and his wife was in it at the old Granada Studios in Manchester, and we thundered up and down this corridor with the camera crew walking backwards until they hit the wall at the far end.
I'd love to see outtakes of that.
The corridor was about must have been 40 yards long, and we did it once, we did it twice, we did it 3 times. And the only reason that the take stopped was when the camera crew literally hit the wall, when their backs hit the wall, and we did it again and again and again. And when I do my one-man show, we've rescued the clip that we've got, me and Keith and Peter, and that's part of my. It actually opens on video of my one-man show.
Oh, lovely! I need to come and see that next year, Bernie. I need to come and see you.
I hope so. Yeah, we're all living in hope, Steve, that we're going to survive this, and we're going to start working again.
Yeah, definitely. I had about 15 cruise ships cancelled this year, but my all-time favourite cruise ship, which I know you've worked, is the QE2. What a wonderful ship that was, wasn't it?
Are you enjoying the series?
I've not seen the series, actually. Is it still on, or is it catch-up?
Oh, you must see it. Yeah, it's on Channel 5.
Okay.
It was on only 2 or 3 nights ago. I don't know whether it's a repeat or not. And my time aboard the QE2, I'll never forget. And the people I met there, I mean, working to the American. That was one of the things about the Vegas show, that Frank Marino looked at us and suddenly thought, this is going to be a car crash. And yet, like you, I'd worked on the QE2 to international audiences, and I knew, because of the visuality of what I did,
it works.
I'd be okay.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was training. I used to run the London Marathon every year, and I used to jog, and I was on this cruise to New York, and Burt Bacharach was one of the passengers.
Wow.
And as we were virtually down to walking pace, and as I overtook Bert, who was shuffling along, he had a friend with him, and I just passed him and said, morning, and he went, hi, and I heard his mate say to him, hey, Bert, and this guy had obviously seen me in cabaret the night before, and Bert hadn't. And he said, Bert, do you know who that guy is? He says, no, I don't. He says, that's the limey on the chicken. The limey on the chicken.
What a description.
When they got to the end of the deck, Bert ended up playing table tennis with my son, David, who never lets me forget that moment. So the QE2, very, very special. I always remember working on it with Frankie Vaughan, a dear friend and a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
And it's only recently, when I've started to see him in films, that you get to know the depth and the breadth of his work, of his
talent,
portfolio.
Yeah.
And we used to do. We were on a QE2, and we were in Lisbon. And Frankie wasn't dining with us. He was dining, I think, probably up in the Queen's Grill, wherever it was. But I was on with Stan Boardman.
Okay.
And we were outside. We just come out of this cafe, and we saw Frankie standing outside the shop, looking thoroughly bored, while Stella was inside shopping. So we nudged each other, me and Stan, and we went up and we made out as if to mug him. So as Stan put his hand in Frankie's right-hand trouser pocket from behind, I whispered into Frank's left ear, "Don't move, senor." And he just about had a heart attack.
Oh no, did he panic?
And then Stan, we're waiting in the doorway. Torrential rain ensued in Lisbon. And there were five lanes of traffic all at the traffic lights. And Stan saw this little guy on a scooter in the middle of this monsoon. And Stan just walked out into the middle of the road, got on the back of the scooter. Taxi, Porto, taxi, Porto. This poor guy was saying, no, senor, no taxi, no taxi. And Porto, taxi, Porto. Oh, man.
Oh, that's brilliant. I remember on the night of the Buckingham Palace thing we were at, Stan Boardman was a very naughty boy. he was causing all sorts of hilarity in behind the scenes, when the Queen was doing her speech, and he's like a naughty schoolboy, isn't he? I guess you all are, actually, all these stories.
We talked about Babacoom just earlier.
Yes.
And, there was a guy called Jack Sharp, in 1983, used to fly acts from Blackpool all over the country. We'd all assemble at Blackpool Airport on a Sunday morning, and there'd be a fleet of different airplanes. And one airplane would be full of people, they'd go off to Great Yarmouth, and then another one, like Oslo, we'd go down to Torquay, to Exeter Airport, get in a coach, and then we'd be dropped off at different theatres for the Sunday concerts.
Wow.
It could have been the Pavilion Theatre.
That's style, isn't it?
Torquay, or the big one in Paynton.
Yeah.
And this was what was going on in those days. And on the Monday morning, as we reassembled at the hotel to fly back, to get the coach to Exeter and fly back to Blackpool, we all turned up and it was a heat wave, and as the coach was trundling through the middle of Torquay, me and Roger de Courcy were there in our shorts. It was ever so hot. and Stan rummaged in his holder and said, I'm going to put my shorts on. He said, I'm frying here, I'm frying. So he sat down in the coach, and he took his trousers and his underpants off to put these shorts on, and I picked his underpants up and threw them out of the open door of the coach, which was travelling about 5 miles an hour, and onto the roadside. And Stan, I can't use his language, he said, "I've just paid a fiver for them." So he jumped out of the coach, naked from the waist downwards, sprinted down the road in a sort of Monday morning in Torquay in a heat wave, crowded with shoppers, and he just picked his underpants up,
Wow.
faced the crowd and said, "Sorry folks, no autographs," and got back, ran back on the coach. Well, I thought De Courcy was going to die. De Courcy would slid down in his seat, screaming with laughter. And the whole way back to Exeter, we were all expecting that the coach would be stopped and Stan would have been arrested. So, again, ridiculous behaviour from young adults.
Oh, controversial.
Fellow water rats, I mean, we've got quite a few that we mutually know in the business, but who was your proposer into the rats, Bernie?
Oh, that was Len Lowe and Ed Stewart, bless, because Ed, we worked together on Crackerjack.
Crackerjack, yeah.
And even earlier, Len used to come out to when I was doing the Lulu series. Len was doing some writing then, lovely Len, and we used to fill me in on the W.C. Fields, and give me tapes about W.C. Fields, and I'd work with Len in summer seasons, etc. So yeah, great times, and I'm just privileged that I was part of it all, Steve.
It's amazing. I'm so glad you've been a part of this. Now, just before we wrap up, Bernie, and thank you so much for your time, if we were sitting down having lunch now, which 3 comedy names would you like to come back, or if they're still alive, which 3 top comedy names would you like to sit with and have lunch?
Well, immediately, of course, I think of the Marx Brothers, and probably Groucho, because he was the most articulate.
Yes.
I don't know what Harpo would be like in conversation. I'm sure he'd be interested, but probably Groucho. And I think then probably Sid Field. Again, I used to watch his shows. He had something called Show of Shows back in black and white, and he was a major star. He had a team of writers for his show. One of them was Mel Brooks, and
Wow.
he had the greatest names in the business starting their careers writing for him. And I always remember watching one of his shows. It was a take on a sort of This Is Your Life, where they dragged Sid Field as the unsuspecting punter out of the audience to have his whole life revealed. And I said, oh God, we'll do something with that, I'm sure. So I was doing summer seasons for John Mills, and Tony Trafford was comparing, and I was working with the Mini-Tones.
Okay.
And there were dancers, and I organised this Is Your Life sketch, where Tony Trafford would drag me out of the audience, and I was sitting there in a big jumper on and carrying a Mac. And he would say, "Well, Eric Farnsbarnes," he says, "it is," and I used to protest, and it was so physical that when he got me up on stage, I accused the audience of laughing at me, and I used to go down in the audience, climbing through the rows of seats to beat people up with this sort of anorak that I'd got, and then the crew would come out and carry me and throw me back on the stage. It was so... And then the characters, the members of my alleged family would start to come out from behind it. And the Mini-Tones, there was Jack Purvis and Kenny Baker, of course,
Yeah.
the Mini-Tones. Well, Jack Purvis would come out first. And apparently in the sketch, I was one of quadruplets. And Jack refers to it, and he would be dressed like Gandhi. talking Indian, and he'd come out and say, And then another. My next quadruplet brother was a huge
You're getting taller.
black dancer, 6'4", built like an Adonis, but absolutely black. And then somebody else, and then I think a girl came out, and then Kenny, little Kenny Baker, would come out as my mother, who hasn't seen me. And it was all about, bird, apple twig. And Kenny would come out wearing, without his teeth in, wearing his wife's dress and a wig on. And he'd come out and he'd cling and he'd sit on my foot. And I'd be walking around the stage trying to shake my mother off my leg like a rabid dog. I tell you what, Steve. And let's not leave Doddy out, eh?
Oh, no. I mean, your speech at Doddy's 90th birthday party, I was very proudly performed for 5 minutes on that day. But that afternoon lunch with Doddy on his 90th was... what you said was hilarious, but it was what you said was poignant as well. It was a perfect speech, but it's so nice to be there. And you must have known Doddy for a few more years than I did.
Well,
but...
lived down the road and saw him back in the 60s and suddenly thought,
wow.
This is, late 50s.
Something.
If I could only do that. And I decided really when he asked me, when Ken asked me would I speak at his lunch, I suddenly thought, what a privilege, what an honour. But I suddenly thought there's no point in being banal. I'm sitting on a table with Roy Hood and Barry Cryer and Sir Michael Grade.
Wow.
Or Lord Michael Grade.
Oh, yes.
A couple more. And I just thought I'd better go for the throat here. So I did tell the story about Ken and his trial, his income tax fraud trial.
Oh, yes.
And say how many we can remember that he was represented by QC George Carman, who, of course, we got an innocent verdict. Ken was declared innocent. When you think of it, on the one hand, you had the HM's Customs and Excise, and on the other was a jury with 12 Scousers. I said, but George Carman got the not guilty verdict and flew immediately to Los Angeles and got Stevie Wonder a driving license. So, that was it. So that would be my ideal guest at dinner, of course.
Oh, yeah. That'd be nice to have Doddy back. That'd be a great lunch, that. Sid Field, Groucho Marx and Ken Dodd. And Bernie Clifton as well. So that'd be my ideal 4 people who sat with me. Bernie, you're always a pleasure to speak to and to watch and listen to. Thank you for doing what you're doing on Facebook as well, because I saw you talking to Max Fulham the other day, a great young ventriloquist, and now doing Cracker Jack, so it's full circle.
Wow, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
he's got a great future, and he's just 21, isn't he?
Yeah, he's brilliant, and it's all about paying it forward, isn't it? Like, you've helped out younger acts, and Ken Dodd did, and Roy Hudd, and I've seen potential in young acts as well. And if they ask for advice, you pass it on, don't you? Because we've had that help when we started out, so it's quite a nice thing.
I'm sure you do. I've told the story about Les Dawson mentoring me, and I know you're mentoring me.
Exactly.
And it's good that we can pass on whatever we can to this next generation, because this next generation, in 20, 30 years' time, they'll be talking about, remember that year when the COVID was pumped, and life will be,
let's hope.
It'll be back to normal, let's hope so.
Let's hope it's just a bit of history, and sooner rather than later. You brightened up my day, Bernie. Thank you so much for being here on Eyes and Teeth. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. You're a comedy legend, and thanks for being here.
Steve, it's my delight to talk to you, and I do appreciate the opportunity. And give my love to the child bride, won't you?
I will do. Thank you, Bernie. Eyes and Teeth. Thanks to the wonderful Bernie, who at 85 is still very busy and connecting with people. Until he stops, you can catch Bernie Clifton on his Facebook page every Sunday at 6 p.m, talking variety and answering your questions. On Twitter, he is @BernieClifton_. Check out more info at his website at www.bernieclifton.co.uk. Today's comedy quote comes from Harpo Marx. Thanks, Harpo. Eyes and Teeth is written, produced and hosted by Steve Hewlett. Vocals by Lola, Larissa and Nina Hewlett. Additional vocals by Rich T. The Eyes and Teeth music and jingles are produced and performed by Kevin Dean. Join me for edition 2 of The Grand Order of Water Rats, Season 8, when I talk to comedian, actor, singer, producer, director, writer. This is one man. And that man is the brilliant Richard Gauntlet.